Let's try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ian Morrison, Electoral Area F Director, and will be chairing the regular Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of Wednesday, September the 4th. I'd like to welcome everyone back from our August break from official meetings. Welcome, Director Acton. And just like to note for everyone, since first meeting back, those here, staff and in the gallery, if you have your electronic devices with you, make sure you're off or on mute or vibrate. And just ask for some patience from everyone in the room as we reorient ourselves to our roles and being on that wonderful camera and recorded for posterity. And I would also like to recognize that the CVRD is on the unceded territories of the Cowichan, Malahat, Subasat, Halalt, Penelakut, Staminas, Liaxin, Pakwachan, DT Dot, and Pachi Dot nations, whose people have walked gently here for thousands of years. With that, I will turn to Ms. Boyd. What do we have up first?
Thank you, Chair. We have the approval agenda. There was one supplemental information item circulated earlier. So I request that it be moved and seconded that the agenda be amended with the addition of the supplemental information received from Jean Hagel and Dana Hagel, application number DVP 23I03 Lot 32 Miracle Close, PID 016771702.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next, Ms. Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. We have the Special Electoral Area Services Committee meeting minutes of July 17th, 2024. Be adopted, sorry.
Thank you. We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion on those special meeting minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Next item.
Thank you, Chair. That we have the minutes of the Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of July 17th, 2024 be adopted.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes, Ms. Boyd?
There will be no business arising from the minutes, but we'll move to the public input period.
Public input period is to offer the public an opportunity to comment on an agenda item before the committee considers the item. Public input period procedure policy is a mouthful and allows for an allotment of 15 minutes where the speaker is welcome to comment on any items on the agenda up to a maximum of 3 minutes. This excludes items that have been or are subject to a public hearing. Input from the community is valued and appreciated. We request that input is presented in a friendly and respectful manner. Your cooperation in maintaining a safe, respectful, and orderly environment is greatly appreciated. And with that, I would like to welcome anyone that would like to make comment on today's agenda to please come forward.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board, Aisquale, CMNCA. I noticed on today's agenda that we have a delegation from the Housing Needs Assessment, and some of the numbers that I noticed in Area B project upwards of 1,700 units needed for 20 years from now, and yet we also have the input from the various planning commissions, advisory planning commissions on the local area plans that suggest that we simply don't have the resources needed to support that kind of housing. And so, Mr. Chair, it's going to be very interesting to witness today's discussion around those two disparate topics. And I also look forward to what we learn about temporary use permits, which is also on today's agenda, particularly with regards to special event use, market use, perhaps community gardens, climate mitigation measures that allow for the temporary use of land. And so thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to learn today and to highlight these items that came to my attention. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to invite anyone else that would like to provide input to the committee on today's agenda items. Welcome.
Hello, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Just like to talk about Lot 32 and the variance for the setback on the watercourse. I've lived in the area for over 12 years, and Sword Fern Creek and Miracle Creek are very special to me, and the salmon that live in that area, as well as the elk. And behind my lot, we have Lakeview Park, and it's my concern that if the precedent is set that we're going to move the variance setback from 15 meters to 8.21 meters, what precedent does that set for the whole area? And also the precedent, what does it set for Lakeview Park? And if that can be sold and built on. It would be, I guess, a recommendation that we use the funds from the CVRD that purchases parkland to repurchase that land, which was once sold by the CVRD. And you know, the homeowner there, I don't think, knew what he was getting into when purchasing that lot, and it was slated at a park at one point, and has since been sold off for reasons that I don't know. But I do oppose the variance permit for that property. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to provide input to committee prior to us moving forward? Looks like none, so I'll turn to Ms. Boyd. What do we have next?
Thank you, Chair. We have delegations. Renee Prolo from LGO, formerly Liquor Geospatial, regarding the interim housing needs assessment results.
Renee, just before you get going, and I understand we might be having Patrick joining as well. There you are on screen. I've already had requests to extend the delegation period to 20 minutes. Is that what you're up there to ask? So I'll go to committee. Do we have a motion to extend? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. So you got 20. Ms. Breen.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, through the chair. In addition to Renee, there will be Patrick Ostrich from Modus presenting today. The intent of today's presentation is to provide...
Hang on, Coralie. Could I ask you to please step outside or cease your conversation while we're conducting business? Thank you.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Breen, go ahead.
The intent of today's presentation by the delegation is to provide the results from the housing needs assessment to the directors prior to UBCM. The full reports will be presented to ESC on October 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So are we going to Renee first?
I believe so. Patrick is going to be here in support of any questions that are geared towards the public consultation aspect of the HNA, but I'm primarily here to discuss the data results for the units projected and what the provincial methodology that was recently released entails. Am I able to share my screen?
I sure hope so.
Great. Okay. Wonderful. Can everyone see my screen? Fantastic. Okay. Great. So my name is Renee Prue. I'm with LGO. And as mentioned, my colleague from Modus, Patrick, is here as well. We've collaborated on numerous projects for the CVRD, but today I'm going to be focusing primarily on the HNA, but also connecting it to the Complete Communities work and MOCP work as well. So our agenda today is to overview the provincial method for the interim HNAs, present the preliminary findings. We're going to discuss potential alternative methods that we developed and tested due to gaps that we had kind of flagged in the provincial method. And then we're going to talk about what's next, connecting that to all the existing work that we're doing. So what are the components of the provincial HNA? We have 6 components that the province has laid out in their mandated process for calculating housing need in a 5 and a 20-year projection. Actually, only 5 of them are relevant to electoral areas, which are extreme core housing need, homelessness, suppressed household formation, growth and vacancy rate. There is also this local demand factor, but this only applies to municipals only. These first 5 components are summed, and then the 6th component of local demand would be applied as a multiplier for this first summed number. So I will go through each of the components that are applicable to EAs relatively quickly, but if you have questions about one component, we can definitely discuss it at the end. Extreme core housing need, it estimates the number of new units required for those who are in vulnerable housing situations. So they're either spending 50% or more of their income on their housing, or it is not adequate, it's in disrepair, or it's not suitable. There aren't enough bedrooms. And if it's not adequate and it's not suitable, if they had to move to an alternative accommodation, would that be over 50% of their income? If yes, then they're in extreme core housing need. This data is available for each electoral area specifically through Statistics Canada. Component B is to reduce homelessness. This estimates the number of new units required for those who are presently and urgently requiring housing. So we have in precarious situations, and then we have those who do not have stable housing at this time. This is from a provincial data set from the Integrated Data Project, and it's people experiencing homelessness. It's only available for the region, but it's only available regionally for everyone. So every municipality, every electoral area, every regional electoral area district is disaggregating from this number based on the percentage of the population. Suppressed household formation builds on the concept of a head of a household. So it addresses households that were unable to form between 2006 and present day due to housing constraints. How household headship works is essentially the concept of going out and creating a new household. So either you are a child who is, outgrowing your parents' home, you're going off and you're creating your own household. There are also cases where you wouldn't have roommates, or you're moving out of a household with roommates. And then there's also situations in like divorce, for example, where 2 people are now creating 2 new households. So this looks at 2006 headship rates by age and also by tenure, so an age group and whether they're renters or owners. And we're applying that to the 2021 population data. So we're saying if we had the same headship rates back in this less constrained housing environment, how many new households would have formed? So components A through C are looking at current need. So how many units do we currently today have a gap of? Now, component D, we're starting to look to the future. So this is looking at a projection of population and kind of calculating if you were to grow at a similar rate, how many units would you need? So this uses BC Stats 20-year projected population data. It's not available for electoral areas. So for a municipality where this projected data is available, you would take an average of the number of households added under the local growth rate and the regional growth rate to kind of get a balance. For electoral areas, the suggested method is to just use the regional growth. This was kind of a flag of something we were a little hesitant on from a methodology standpoint, and so this is going to be discussed further. But first, I just want to finish these components. Rental vacancy rate. This is the number of rental units needed to account for a healthy vacancy rate. Primary rental market vacancy rate data is used for this, but the CMHC, they only look at primary rental markets. So this is actually not available anywhere in the CVRD, not for the region, not for the member municipalities or the electoral areas. We know that secondary rental markets are more common in the CVRD, but the solution to this from the provincial methodology standpoint is to just use the BC vacancy rate of 1.4%. So how many units for rentals would you need to add to get from 1.4% to get to 3%, the target? When we calculate this out, this is the results. So something I'll note is that the provincial methodology, because it does some top-down and some bottom-up kind of disaggregation and aggregation methods, you wouldn't be able to add up every single one of the electoral areas and municipalities within the CVRD and get this total number. They're similar, but they're not exactly perfect, so that's something to keep in mind. But generally, we're looking at adding about 5,000 new units within the Cowichan Valley over 5 years, and then around 15,000 over 20, and this is the breakdown per electoral area. I can bring that slide up again later, or we can discuss it further, but I'm sure some of you kind of thought through, as I was quickly going through the provincial method, maybe you had some concerns, and I have also been thinking, about what are the potential flaws of the provincial method. I'll start with this one. Vacancy rate, we know it's only available for BC. CBRD is a region with a strong secondary rental market. Unfortunately, there isn't much better data available, so we couldn't there wasn't really a process in which we could improve this data source from the provincial method. The same thing went for persons experiencing homelessness. It's disaggregated based on the percent share of the population. Further local study could be useful, but difficult. Some municipalities might have point in time counts, and it's possible that people who are unhoused might, be more aggregated in population centers, but also we don't know that for sure. And so this is something that either requires further study in order to suggest any sort of amelioration on the provincial method. And maybe there are other criticisms that I haven't addressed that I can hopefully, field questions about and hopefully, provide solutions or provide kind of assurances of this data method. But the growth data, when we saw that they were applying averages for the entire region, which is heavily influenced by population centers like municipalities, we wondered if that was appropriate for the electoral areas. So we decided to test an alternative method where instead of using these BC Stats projected population, we used 20-year historic household growth rates for each of the electoral areas from the census to replicate that municipal methodology of averaging out those growth rates. So basically this is the exact same slide we were looking at before, but the new data source is Statistics Canada DA level. So DA level is kind of like almost like tiny little neighborhood blocks, so that we could ensure that we weren't getting a messed up number because of changing electoral area boundaries. So this is the household growth. And this is the result of that. So we do see that electoral areas, some have experienced quite a bit of change over the last 20 years in their household growth rate. So, we see some like A and B and I who experienced in the 40 to 45% range in growth. And then the CBRD's regional growth rate, the one that according to the provincial method should just be applied as is for those 5 and 20-year numbers, is 29.41%. So we can see here in some cases the averaging is going to bring the number down, and in some cases it's going to bring the number of projected households up. And this column is the provincial methodology unedited, the numbers that I presented to you earlier. This is the adapted method that I've just kind of outlined, where we use the 20-year household growth over the last 20 years, and we project it forward. I'll note while we're looking at the numbers together, but then I'll review on the next slide. The totals, very similar. It's really just kind of impacting the distribution within the electoral areas. So overall, we see that the incorporating a local growth rate for the AAs minimally increases the number of units that are required overall. We do see some swapping of distribution between A, B, E, and G, but generally these results aren't so different that we see this data gap as an actual notable flaw in the provincial method, and we do recommend following the provincial method as is. Next steps. Okay, so just threw a lot of information at you numbers wise, but they're just units, right? What are we going to do with that? So there are a lot of ways that we can build on the provincial methodology's projection for how many units that are required. Things like affordability, unit mixes, and testing where growth is possible. So the affordability and the build forms are an important context to a unit target. What should we actually zone for to ensure that we're making something that fits need? So we can apply census data such as headship rates to break down these unit targets into building types, so either attached versus detached forms, and size. How many bedrooms are the households requesting when they come to the CBRD? So we can also understand broadly what cost targets we need for different households, which we can tie into things like Bill 16's inclusionary zoning bylaw. To incorporate the HNA into the complete communities work, so aligning the two, first off, we need to upgrade the 20-year HNA to a 25-year projection. And then we need to look at LAP-specific targets, which is what the complete communities work did. And then we integrate that into the alternate futures report. So we say, okay, if we need to build this number of units over the next 25 years, where would they go, keeping in mind, sewer servicing and things like that. And so this is being actively incorporated into the alternate futures report, which will link to the MOCP update. This is an example of the results of the 25-year projections. You can see here, this is an example of how in electoral area A, the total number of units was broken down into demand for different bedroom sizes and built form types. And then for the complete communities related work, we scaled these results to the LAPs, and then we moved a couple units from detached to attached to address current gap in affordability, and this is linked to core housing need. So here I have a little table of core housing need. Core housing need is very similar to what I described earlier of extreme core housing need, but instead it uses 30% as a benchmark. And this is an example of what this further study that we're going to be doing on affordability. So for example, in an area where we have relatively low core housing need, from a regional standpoint, we have annual household incomes, and we know, for example, that 16% or 17% of households make around 21 to 50% of that area median income. Well, we're going to need households that are affordable. To make them affordable, need to be kind of priced in this $475 to $1,200 monthly range. And then for another example, in an area where we have a little bit higher core housing need, we can do a similar cost breakdown. And this, again, could support policy such as inclusionary zoning bylaws. So just to bring it back to the next steps, basically, as Corley stated, we're the publication of the HNA, the update of the Complete Communities Alternative Futures, and the MOCP update is what this will all be feeding into. So I am available for questions. I can go back to slides. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. I realize this was a lot of information. So I'm happy to clarify.
Thank you, Renee, and just remind everyone, we are going to be having a staff presentation in first week of October that will probably provide us more detail and context. This has been very heavy on statistics, was, well, for me, a bit of a challenge to follow along, but very informative. And I probably have a lot of questions, but I won't pose them today. I'll go to Director Wilson first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And as you say, let's, for the time being, I'll bypass the statistics. One of the phrases that was used there in the presentation was understand cost targets. And this is something which I have a real problem with, because those targets are very, very quickly exceeded or outdated because of local planning or provincial ministry delays. How can we as a regional district, and I'm not even so sure that we can answer this question here, but it's a question which has to be asked. How can we as a regional district minimize or even eliminate this aspect of rising costs because of delays? And I have a personal involvement here, because projects which I've been planning for 3 years are now almost unaffordable. So how do we do this and get affordable housing into an affordable state without it being these targets being exceeded? Thank you.
Renee, can you take that one? I don't.
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. I think there are some procedural, there's a procedural element there that I cannot speak to, and I definitely agree that, I mean, the numbers that I was showing you earlier, I could go back to them. These are 2020 numbers. We already know they're out of date. Census data is out of date. I think that generally when it comes to these very specific cost targets that we're talking about, it's very easy to get lost. And I think that the broader conversation should be more focused on, let's get, if we know that there's an affordability concern, we can support more movement into attached built forms, which are always going to be more affordable than a detached built form. And that I think zoning and policy has a lot more control over, and is a little more resilient to, as you say, price creeps with time. But the specific financial numbers around, how much can an average family afford? Those are still important numbers to have as an understanding to kind of benchmark, do we have a good variety of housing options in our community?
Director Acton.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if I missed something. For the targets for Area B, there were numbers around 500, and then I think it was like for the next 5 years, and then the next 20 years was 1,500. So the amount of units. And so I guess, is there also data in this presentation that can be compared with it? How many units have come before? So if we only build 10 units a year at the moment, then a goal of 500 might be astronomical. So just to better understand those numbers.
You're muted, Renee.
Sorry. Thank you. I really like this question because it touches on something that I don't think I specifically mentioned on this slide. I'm not sure exactly how many units had been built, for example, in B over the last 20 years, but I do know there was significant growth. So I do think that there has been units built. This provincial method is a projection. It's not a forecast, and it's definitely not a development forecast. So it's not necessarily saying that this is what is going to be built. It's saying this is how many units are required to address need and address demand and address, who is already living in the area in a precarious situation and who, based on past trends, would want to move. But it is not necessarily saying that 1,500 units are 100% going to be built. It's not a development forecast. It is a projection of need.
Sure. But then you've also talked about, there was another point that you brought up. So for example, it was the attached and detached, like types of dwellings.
Yes.
In electoral areas where we don't have sewer and water, there's even more layers of challenge that's not even in our zoning to deal with is island health. So I've had many complaints from people who suddenly are able to build a carriage house because of Bill 44, and then island health has stepped in and said, well, no, you need to develop this certain kind of water system. That's not gonna, it's not as easy as just building another carriage house. So I'm not going to say that is a fact. I'm not a planner and I wasn't involved with it, but I think there's so many other layers that are stumbling blocks that just looking these goals or possible or need, they just feel kind of unrealistic or anyway, just.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? So we'll hear in the next presentation, I guess, in October.
Yeah, I can say that we have been starting to model these unit demands in the alternate futures reporting, and obviously we're not putting additional development in areas where there is not sewer servicing. And so far, we have seen that this level of kind of these projected numbers are reasonable for what we've seen so far in the modeling. But I understand that we wouldn't want to be putting these 1,400 new units on an area that isn't serviced. Are there any other additional questions?
There is, we're just trying to figure out, somebody's got something dinging in the room here, so. Okay, the digging has stopped. Director Martman next.
I have a question, but I thought I'd just follow up on that one because have we ever done anything that would indicate what we can take in terms of units? Based on, because in my area, for example, water would be an important issue of how you'd get enough water.
The alternate futures report, as part of the complete communities assessment, is taking into account infrastructure as it models out potential future change when it's that we call them build outs because we're building out units. So it does take that into account. And this is something that will be expanded on in the future presentation.
Follow up?
Thank you. So my question is just going back to, I think you were providing alternatives to the methodology that the government put in, and I'm interested if there's one particular one that sort of stands out among the three. I think your general impression was crunching the numbers and comparing both of them. It wasn't a big enough difference to make it, to say we should do something different. But is there one particular one in those aspects that you would say is causing, I guess, you to think twice about it? And for example, the one that jumps out to me, but it may not be the one that you pick, is the homelessness. To sort of brush that out as an average across a region for an electoral area, to me, this seems to be not representative of what's actually in those areas. So, but it could be a different one that may be causing you an issue.
Yeah, I obviously considered it as a potential data gap, but the issue is that, for starters, I think a lot of it is anecdotal. We don't really, we could say anecdotally that perhaps unhoused populations congregate in population centers where there are services, but also there are a lot of people who choose to camp in rural areas such as the forest where there's privacy, and point in time counts are really, they're point in time snapshots and don't necessarily kind of reflect change, nor do they necessarily capture everyone. So I guess my answer to that is it's true that it is kind of the provincial method in general to kind of say you have to calculate housing need and it has to be a blanket method has its benefits. We can compare across the province. The province can say, okay, everyone's following the same method, so we can we have an overall idea that everyone's doing a similar thing and we can compare and contrast. But obviously there is no one size fits all. So I think that my recommendation is to use the HNA, have those numbers, but then also understand that maybe there's going to be some differences. Maybe we're going to have some redistribution of units based on servicing or what we, as local authorities understand about the region. But for specifically persons experiencing homelessness, there just is no better data available that could get us at a more precise answer for need in that category.
Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, fantastic report. It was great. I was able to keep up with my B+ stats grade, so that was good that I was able to follow along. Two questions. First, just curious about what the best I'll call it is like a margin of error. Would you say, were you conservative with your numbers? Did you try to go spot on? And if you had to guess, what might be the margin of error either way in terms of the percentages?
Yeah, of course. The provincial method doesn't actually describe a margin of error or anything like that. So I guess officially there is no kind of state of range. I'll say that actually there is no rounding until the very, very last step. So it actually is quite precise. But obviously we're using census data, which is rounded. I would say that there is obviously like a plus or minus 20 units at minimum for the demand. But also, we're predicting the future, right? You can't predict the future. There's always going to be, as soon as factors change, we would need to update this information. So I would say that it is not necessarily useful to identify a range at this time, and it can be treated as a number because we know that there are just going to be evolutions in how this calculation will go based on new data that becomes available every year, and especially every 5 years with the census.
Follow. And I was curious, maybe I did miss it at one of the beginning slides, but was there any sort of zeroing in on the population groups that are most vulnerable or are suffering the worst effects of this? Like, is it young families? Is it people about to retire? You know, what are the groups that are really feeling the brunt of this catastrophic housing crisis?
Great question. I mean, the provincial method focuses on obviously the unhoused population is a priority within the components, and then extreme core housing need. We know statistically, that women-led households, so specifically single mothers, and there are a couple other categories. I'm not sure specifically which categories within the CVRD would be the most important, but this is actually something I could research and prepare for the next council presentation. But it's generally women-led households, refugee-led households, new immigrant households have the highest rates of core housing need. And so this is something that we could factor into an affordability calculation, because those are also Statistics Canada data sets that we can look at and understand, okay, what are the rates for core housing need of these more vulnerable populations in our community?
Thank you. Can I have a brief comment? Yeah.
Go ahead.
The report is fantastic. I mean, but we don't need a report to see this. All we have to do is drive down the street. These are absolutely staggering numbers, and this is a failure at every level of government. That if this doesn't motivate us to do something about this housing crisis, I mean, I don't know what will. Like, this has to encourage us to figure out a way forward to get housing for our family members, for our community members. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I've actually put myself on the list because I just want to pose a question and maybe give a bit of a lead into staff for when they come to us in October. I can tell you when I was on the UBCM executive that the previous housing needs assessment was maybe not universally panned across the province, but it wasn't heavily relied upon as being a good document to base policy and development decisions. So I guess what I'm asking is this will this ultimately be a good foundational document for us to be taking those steps, putting into action some of those things that we will need to do, as Director McClinton had indicated, because I think when staff come back, we are going to have an awful lot of questions about how do we deal with island health, how do we deal with the anomalies that we face, the processing time of applications, because we have to take steps to relieve this crisis. And the previous housing needs assessment it varied so dramatically from area to area that I don't think there was confidence in the base document for local governments across the province to make good, sound decisions. So I want to hear from you if this is going to be a fully defensible exercise, and that will this be a strong and firm foundation for us to tackle all of those other areas and not have to worry about whether or not the basis that we're using this for is strong and defensible across the province.
I do think that this method is strong and defensible. I think that, and it's going to be especially bolstered by MODIS's component of public consultation. We will see alignment in what we're seeing from the numbers and from what community members are saying. I think that it is rooted in both it's rooted in historic data that is specific to the area and takes into account different components that I think are very important, like the vacancy rate, which I don't always see in projections, suppressed household formation, things like that. I do think that it is a pretty fulsome look at housing need, and although I don't think that kind of as a standalone, you can never just work with just numbers. It needs also that public consultation component to be a strong foundational document, which it will include. And obviously, as we mentioned, there are flaws anytime you're trying to make a provincial method that can apply to any community. But when we tested, alternate data sources, we found that, there wasn't that much variation. So I actually do really think that this is a strong foundation.
Well, thanks for that, Renee. And I think, I've got Director Nicholson, and I think before we go, I think I gotta let Patrick say something at the end there around the
I
public
think
consultation.
that would be a good segue for Patrick, because we've just brought up the public consultation.
Okay, well, why don't we go to Patrick, and then we'll let Director Nicholson close out questions. So Patrick, you got anything to add? And could you lower your presentation for us, please?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I can probably give a few pieces of information related to key findings from our engagement over the course of just the early summer on this topic. And so we held 3 types of activities to engage the public in the electoral areas, residents primarily, but service providers and others. So there was an online survey that was held in June. There was interviews that were conducted with service providers, and there was a workshop for equity-seeking groups and organizations that provide some of these housing services as well. So ultimately, we had engagement for the broad cross-section of the public with the online survey, and then we also had some targeted engagement with very specific groups who are used to providing services or providing housing for these community members. And some of the key findings are that there's a lot of folks who would like to see larger units and larger lots. They would like to see renovations of buildings and improvements to those buildings, to the existing housing stock, and greater affordability in general as well. They'd like to see reduced development barriers so that more housing can be built, and perhaps also some just less government involvement in the building of housing. We also saw that, or we heard from groups that there's a lack of transitional housing for folks who are trying to go from, a situation where they are without a house to something that they either rent or own. And so that lack of transitional housing can be a bit of a gap for folks to get around. We also heard quite a bit about the cycle of homelessness and how, especially for folks who are either suffering from certain types of addictions or folks who are arriving as refugees, if you don't have an address, it's really difficult to, say, sign up your kid for school. And if you can't sign up your kid for school, you can't find a job. And if you can't find a job, well, you can't prove that you can pay your rent. So there's these kinds of circular challenges that exists in the community when we don't have enough housing or the supports for those who are seeking housing. And the fulsome report on the engagement summary will be provided with the full interim housing needs report. And so we'll be able to present some more detailed information on that come October 3rd.
Thank you for that, Patrick, and I'll go to Director Nicholson.
Thank you. This is a super interesting report. I am trying to think through the implications of the 2 different methods. So in my area, which is Area E, there's quite a significant difference in numbers between the alternative method and the provincial method. And I'm wondering, maybe overall, and maybe it makes sense to use the same methodology as everyone else, but I'm wondering about the implications on how we use this needs assessment on an area by area basis. What's that going to mean for Area E? We have very limited growth areas because most of it's ALR. So it's kind of Yeah, I'm just kind of grappling with what the implications are, and maybe that's something that we'll discuss in October, I don't know.
Renee, do you want to jump in there? I think Director Nicholson sort of hit the nail on the head. We've got a lot of area by area specific discussions to have around the idiosyncrasies of our particular areas, but is there any general comment that you may have on Director Nicholson's question?
Definitely. I would say that I think come October we'll have a lot more information about what we modeled to be possible within each of the areas. So what, and then we'll have something more precise and tangible to discuss for these area by area discussions. I can see that, Area E's percent change in households was 12.29% over the last 20 years, which is quite a bit lower from the average for the region of 29.41%. So yes, there is a big difference when we have that tested, when we tested two different methodologies. I would say that generally housing and the fact that this is kind of more community that there is going to be some redistribution, I believe, of these targets within each area based on demand and kind of natural market conditions. And that I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned over one area's target, because we're going to be looking at this kind of from an like a LAP perspective, and a lot of the LAPs are actually bordering two electoral areas, for example. So I think that the area specific concerns will be addressed when we actually get into kind of modeling what's likely going to happen or what's possible. But I don't think that it's worth doing different methodologies on an area by area basis. I rather think that it's more sufficient to do the mandated provincial method and then understand that there might be kind of some differences when we look at it from a healthy regional government perspective. I hope that wasn't too generic of a response, but I do think that we're going to be learning more about the kind of specifics for the area, the specific electoral areas in the October meeting.
Thank you.
I see Patrick's got his hand up, so fire away.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that in terms of implications for certain communities where, we might not have that much land or there's a lot of ALR, it might also mean that we have to start looking at new efficient typologies of housing that take up less land, right? And that increase density and that use less land but can house more people ultimately. And so I think that's kind of one of the outcomes in this is when we see kind of these larger numbers, we have to start thinking about different typologies and the changing kind of landscape of residential development.
Great. So this has been very informative, and I think that we will have to start to think about our questions for staff when the staff report comes forward in October. And in the meantime, I want to thank both Renee and Patrick for your attendance today and the presentation of this information. Very well received, good information, and we look forward to hearing from you again in the future. So thank you very much for your attendance here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So just looking at what we have before us, everyone, I think that we've got some correspondence and some information items. We knew this was going to take a bit of time, so I think if we can try to get through to the beginning of reports, then we can take a quick break and then reconvene. So with that, Ms. Boyd, I think we're in section 6, so please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. We're at 6, correspondence. C1, grant and aid request for Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, Duncan, Cowichan Chamber of Commerce. That it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area C, Cobble Hill, in the amount of $500 be provided to the Duncan, Cowichan Chamber of Commerce to support year-round visitor services in the Cowichan Region Visitor Center.
Moved by Director Wilson, seconded by Director Abbott. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries, and that will be going to the Wednesday, September 11th, 2024 board meeting. Ms. Boyd, next item.
Thank you. C2, grant and aid request Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay regarding Cowichan Regional Visitor Center. That it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area D, Cowichan Bay in the amount of $1,000 be provided to the Cowichan Regional Visitor Center to provide 2024 annual support for the year-round visitor servicing operations of the CVRC and as one of the 5 southern CVRD districts.
Moved by Director Abbott, seconded by Director Segal. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. C3.
C3, grant and aid request, Electoral Area A, Mill Bay, Malahat, regarding the Cowichan Estuary Nature Center. That be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area A, Mill Bay, Malahat, in the amount of $1,000 be provided to the Cowichan Estuary Nature Center to provide field trip and in-classroom watershed education for school-aged children in School District Number 79.
Moved by Director Segal, seconded by Director Dick. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. C4.
Thank you, Chair. Grant and aid request, Electoral Area I, Yubo Mead Creek, Cowichan Estuary Nature Center. That be recommended to the board that a grant and aid, Electoral Area I, Yubo Mead Creek, in the amount of $1,500 be provided to the Cowichan Estuary Nature Center to fund restoration team and educators to provide programs focused on watershed education, ecological literacy, outreach, and mentoring for school-age learners.
Moved by Director Deck, seconded by Director Abbott. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. C5.
Thank you, Chair. Grant and aid request, Electoral I, Yubo Mead Creek, Cowichan Stewardship Roundtable, Cowichan Community Land Trust. That it be recommended to the board that a grant and aid Electoral Area I, Yubo Mead Creek, be provided to the Cowichan Stewardship Roundtable, Cowichan Community Land Trust in the amount of $3,000 to support the work of the Cowichan Stewardship Roundtable to bring awareness of the importance of celebrating and protecting the Cowichan River.
Moved by Director Deck, seconded by Director Segal. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries.
Number 7, we have information items. This includes Electoral Area A.
No, you could just say there's a bunch of information items here.
Thank you, Chair. There's Electoral Area A, B, C, D, D, and Electoral E, F, F, G, H, and I. These were our Planning Commission minutes throughout the summertime, it looks like. And those are information items.
Director Abbott?
I was reading, and I don't know if this was an oversight, but 7, item 5, electorally, joint D and E APC meeting, and we have the chair and vice chair signing off on the minutes, but just the chair and vice chair from E and not the chair and vice chair of area D. So I don't know if that was an oversight, and I checked with my colleague, Director Nicholson, and we were all there, and it just seems to be missing the co-chairs.
Thank you. I'll take that up, and that a recommendation actually needs to go back to the commission when their minutes get adopted.
Okay.
So we can touch base with them. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments in regards to the items listed? Seeing none, I think, does that bring us to IN2? IN2.
Thank you, Chair. Electoral Area E, Cowichan Station, Satlam, Glenora Community Parks Advisory Commission minutes for information.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we will go on to reports in 11 minutes, so we'll recess until 2:35. Welcome back, everyone. Turn your attention to Section 8, Reports. We have Mr. Buchan here today to provide us some information on temporary use permit policy and guidelines. So please, oh, you're already there. Welcome, Mr. Buchan. What have you got for us today?
Thank you. And if we could advance to slide 3, please. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on the draft temporary use permit guidelines and options for implementation. Included in the report package is a preliminary draft of possible TUP guidelines, as well as complementary amendments to the Procedures Bylaw and Development Information Bylaw. The CVRD currently limits its authority to consider and issue TUPs throughout the region. As a quick reminder, at the January 17th, 2024 EASC meeting, staff presented a report to summarize the current policy framework for issuing TUPs, which varies per electoral area. And on the slide in front of you is sort of a comparison between the current limited approach and what we could potentially look towards, which is a bit of a blanket approach. At that meeting, we were directed to prepare amendments for the bylaws and draft the guidelines, including guidelines for temporary housing for consideration. And next slide, please. So the preliminary draft policy is a starting point for engagement and would support a consistent approach across the region for considering TUPs, and this approach would increase flexibility for the board to consider TUPs. There are some general guidelines that would apply to all types of temporary use permits. The general conditions include confirming servicing such as water, sewer, and drainage, requirements for security to help ensure that TUPs cease when permits expire, and options to limit the terms of permits. Next slide, please. In addition to these general guidelines, there are specific guidelines for different types of temporary uses that could be contemplated under these draft guidelines. First one on screen right now is temporary RV accommodation. These guidelines would allow the board to consider TUPs for temporary seasonal worker accommodation. This would generally be for farm workers, but could also be for commercial or industrial developments. Next slide, please. For short-term rental uses, these guidelines would allow the board to consider authorizing short-term rentals in suites, either attached or detached, subject to some conditions, such as ensuring owner occupancy of the property and limiting the number of occupants in rentals. Next slide, please. The guidelines for temporary commercial uses provide flexibility that would allow the board to consider authorizing any temporary commercial use on lands already designated for commercial purposes or industrial purposes. There are some conditions, such as using existing buildings, that would help to ensure that temporary uses do not result in permanent changes to a site. And next slide, please. Similarly, the guidelines for temporary industrial uses provide flexibility for the board to consider authorizing temporary industrial uses on parcels already zoned for industrial purposes. There are some provisions that would help prevent heavy industrial uses that have the potential to contaminate a site. And next slide, please. The guidelines for temporary worker housing would provide options for the board to consider temporary worker housing in commercial and/or industrial areas where servicing is available. There's also some flexibility to consider these uses on agricultural land, provided that the impacted lands can be restored and improved for agriculture in the long term. Next slide, please. There's also guidelines for market and festival uses that would include measures to ensure that these uses are seasonal and do not occur year-round. And there are complementary amendments to the Development Information Bylaw to ensure that the CVRD can require things like public safety plans, traffic management information, and monitoring reports. As a quick note here, this would not replace the special event permits. Special event permits are currently a tool that we can use to help regulate special events. Typically, there's a threshold of at least 500 people, and it would be in areas presently zoned for those events. Next slide, please. The recommendation is to advance the application. No action is needed at this point, as the board's previously authorized consultation with the APCs and external agencies. Next slide, please. Other options, should the board wish, would be to direct staff to return with additional information. I'm here if there's questions, and we have support in the room as well.
Thank you, Mr. Buchan. Look at that, Director Martman's ready to go already. Go ahead, Director Martman.
Thank you, and thank you for this. Looking forward to this discussion. I just interested in the 3 years. Is that set somewhere? How did that come about?
So the 3 years is the maximum in the Local Government Act that a temporary use permit can be issued for. It can be renewed once for a total of 6 combined years. The board can choose to do a full 3 years, or they could choose on some uses to do fewer than 3.
Follow up?
And the other question is more around the temporary use of recreation vehicles as accommodation. You mentioned something, I think, about on farmland. The question,
sorry.
And the question would be, what dance do you have to do with the Agricultural Land Commission about what needs approval and what doesn't, what local government can approve.
Certainly, and through the chair, as part of this process, we'd likely refer out to the Agricultural Commission when we get an application. I would imagine that we could be looking at a non-adhering residential use application through the commission to allow for the worker housing, and then that would be in addition to a CVRD TUP being issued for the site. If I can, I have worked in an area where we did issue TUPs for ALR lands. And I can think of one where we issued 2 TUPs for a maximum total of 6 years, and the commission had approved it through a non-farm use for a maximum of 7 years. So if the board had wished to exceed and do an additional permit, they could have at that time.
Well, while you're on that, is there a difference between temporary farm worker use and tourism, farm working stay, agritourism use? Is there a differentiation? Through the chair to the chair. This could be used potentially for both agritourism accommodation in the LR or farm worker housing. It's structured mostly towards farm worker housing, but could be used for both. Under the ALC regulations, there's an allowance for agritourism accommodation, but we would have to approve it through either a TUP or through zoning, and then there's some conditions that fall around that as well. Thank you. Director Segal.
Thank you, through the chair. Just to add on to that, the RV regulation drafts is that there will only be allowed on farm status land, only. So I guess I'm just wondering why only?
Through the chair, there's the allowance for lands on farms that have farm assessment, but also in conjunction with temporary worker housing for multi-unit commercial or industrial development. So there is some potential flexibility there. The idea with farm assessment was partially to be in line with ALC requirements, which generally requires farm assessment if we're looking into accommodations.
So someone with a large property zoned residential could also apply?
Under these guidelines, this would generally just be for agricultural land or in conjunction with multi-unit commercial or industrial development. So you could potentially have it on the site where there's the multi-unit commercial or industrial development occurring.
Follow-up? So I guess I'm just wondering, is the intent of the TUP for RV accommodation to help with the housing crisis or totally unrelated?
Through the chair, this would help with potentially where there's housing being constructed and you need to house workers for that, or for farm workers who need housing on a seasonal basis as they come in and work on farms. It doesn't provide a long-term solution to live in RVs as a permanent dwelling. Director Abbott, were you scratching your ear trying to get my attention? Okay, thank you. Director Acton next.
I have a couple. When you went over temporary use permits, you had a chart and you mentioned the local area plans. So do you foresee some new bylaws coming that we won't need these temporary use permits anymore?
Just let me catch up here. I think we're referring to attachment A that shows the current policy framework and how it differs from electoral area to electoral area. Is that accurate? Okay. So right now, TUPs are regulated in part through the OCP, which maps different areas that can accommodate TUPs, as well as through the local area plans that set out in these specific areas, here's the policies that apply and further limits consideration for TUPs. We could look at incorporating this in the new modernized fish community plan, and that would be a way to deal with it. Does that help answer the question? Go ahead.
Different question. So in Area B, there's mixed views on short-term rentals, mostly that we actually, as a community, depend on them a lot for our local economy and housing for people who are just there for a short amount of time or for families, for the use of places on the lake and that kind of thing. So whenever TUPs come up, we do get few letters about short-term rentals and how that will affect. And so can you talk about what's the connection with short-term rentals in Area B with this temporary use permit?
Yeah, so for short-term rentals, this is dealt with, I'm just going to pull up the page for you so that you've got a copy of it.
Because we have, and we also opted out, so just how that kind of applies.
So right now, TUPs could not be considered for short-term rentals in that electoral area. This would allow the board to consider issuing TUPs for short-term rentals, subject to some conditions, such as making sure that there's owner occupancy of the site. So it could be for a suite or a standalone separate suite that they could look at potentially issuing a TUP to allow short-term vacation rentals.
Go ahead.
So owner occupied is already in the zoning, so there would not be a need for a TUP. Would there be?
Through the chair, my understanding with the existing zoning is that there's a difference between a bed and breakfast operation where it's within the house that the owner lives versus renting a standalone suite or a separate suite as a short-term rental. I believe community planning is working on some potential amendments to the zoning bylaw to deal with Bill 35 and its implications.
I thought that was already dealt with.
Mike Tippett.
Mr. Tippett to the lectern, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's Bill 35. Did you say 45?
I thought it said 35.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, I heard, maybe it's just my old man hearing, but yeah, Bill 35. I am working right now with some other divisions on a package of proposed amendments that we're going to bring to this committee at some point to deal with stabilizing our bylaws or making them more clear for the question of short-term rental. We've already told committee members that there are approximately 100 parcels right now in the regional district where short-term rentals are permitted. We're going to change the terminology within the bylaws to make that crystal clear. And you know, it just helped basically our enforcement group do their work to do that. And so Ian and his staff are reviewing that right now. I just finished them earlier this week. They'll be probably coming to committee in October, I hope, sometime. So to try and answer your question about short-term rentals at Shawnigan Lake, you know, the OCP would have to be amended to allow us, the board, to consider issuing TUPs for short-term rental in any of the electoral areas. And I guess, you know, Richard's report sort of deals with that. At the moment, there aren't any permitted sites in Area B that I'm aware of zoning-wise that permit short-term rental. And Richard's also right that the distinction between bed and breakfast and short-term rental is quite clear, and we're going to make it clearer in the package of amendments we're working on right now. I hope that helped.
So just for the purposes of today, you're saying that under the temporary use permit, that's not something that is being contemplated under this suite of information?
In this suite of information
Yes.
for TUPs, short-term rentals are being dealt with as providing a path to allow for it, subject to owner occupancy on the site.
Right, and we're gonna get further clarification on that specific area from Mr. Tippett in October.
In terms of the zoning, yes. So these
Yes.
are two different projects, but they
Yes.
have some overlap.
Okay, thank you. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. Just along the same short-term rental, I just have a quick question. If I was to go and get a job in Timbuktu and I wanted to rent my house for 6 months while I was away, would that be possible or not possible? Or
Under our current policies, it wouldn't be possible as a short-term rental, it'd be possible as a long-term rental. Under this, it would allow owner occupancy. I believe we have some language here about allowing potentially the whole rental of a house for a period of
for sure.
122 days while someone's on vacation.
Okay, so just generally, I need to understand this whole thing. The Schedule A is the existing, and so what you have laid out here are a bunch of areas where we would use, that we would do instead of what is currently there.
Through the chair, yes, we'd essentially be removing Schedule A and going just to Attachment B and allowing
Okay.
that consistently across the region.
So one of the questions I have is, why would you limit special commercial uses to commercial areas? Because it seems to me one of the areas that you might want to try is corner store in a residential area.
Mhm.
So there doesn't seem to be an option for that to happen.
And through the chair, at the present, there's not. This was an attempt to balance some of the goals and objectives of the current policies, which are looking at limiting impacts to neighborhoods, which was also reflected by the ESC in their discussion on the 17th of January. And one of the potential solutions there to limit impacts to neighborhoods is to look at providing maximum flexibility on existing commercial sites. That still has some utility and use. For example, if someone wanted to open up a daycare and had to rezone a site, that could take some time, whereas a TUP would allow it to potentially happen much quicker and then issue a TUP as they're going through a rezoning process.
So you could put a daycare in a residential area?
In a commercial area.
In a commercial area, but not in your home, which is quite often what happens, right? So
might be a-
that's a bit of a gap? Oh, daycares are allowed in residential areas?
Daycares of a certain size are allowed in
Okay.
residential areas. Sorry if that example was a poor one.
I'm just trying to think of the different things. So in my area, we've had a lot of trouble with temporary use permits for special events. And I'm still a little bit unclear about the difference between a temporary use permit and a special event permit.
And if I may, through the chair, a key difference between the two is that a special event permit comes into play when we hit a certain capacity of people. So generally it's a size of around 500 people or more. And it's on a site that's already zoned for that type of use. Whereas a temporary use permit doesn't replace a special event permit. It would be to allow a special event on a site that's not presently zoned for that use for a period of 1 to 3 years and doesn't necessarily have to hit that 500 person threshold.
Okay.
Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. Just on a personal note, I just want to say congratulations to Mr. Buckham. I won't elaborate on a very important major life event. I'll leave it at that. I don't know how much you want to share.
Just leave us hanging.
Yeah, you can talk to him after. If he wants to share, I'll let him. I was curious about, you said you're going to take it to external agencies. What might, just an example of what those external agencies might be and what sort of feedback are you going to be looking for?
Certainly, and through the chair, the key feedback we're looking for is feedback from the advisory planning commissions. Other agencies, such as the Agricultural Land Commission, has a policy branch that provides comments, and that would be useful in understanding what sort of applications or requirements they might have on applications that are in the ALR, and that would just provide greater clarity to the board when that comes back.
Follow up?
And just approximately, when might we see this coming back to the committee for furthering it along?
Through the chair, I don't presently have a time frame for that, but our next steps would be to start the external agency consultation, and then once we have more information, we'd be coming back with a summary of that information and steps for implementation.
I've got Director Martman, myself, and Director Nicholson for a second round. Director Martman.
Thank you, and I'm still hovering around this accommodation and recreational vehicles and wondering if other regional districts are using TUPs on residential properties for this, and what's your thoughts?
Through the chair, there are other regional districts that have used this as a tool. It's not I don't think there's a consistent approach across BC. One of the challenges with RV accommodation is that they're not designed to be a dwelling unit, and there's a BC Building Code challenge there. So the intent of this is to provide flexibility to use those as seasonal dwellings, or sorry, seasonal accommodations. So that could be for farm workers, potentially for agritourism, but it provides that sort of niche. It doesn't provide an option for year-round accommodations.
So my question is something that we haven't really contemplated yet, but I'm curious about the potential interplay of a temporary use permit as it relates to home-based businesses. And I know that there are folks that start a home-based business and they hire that one external employee, they begin to have some success, and then they're into that challenge of if they grow, they will have to rezone their property, and it could be a mechanic shop, it could be something that may have some external signs of business activity. Would a temporary use permit come into play as a perhaps interim measure between their current zone with the home-based business and having to go to a full rezoning process? Is that something that's contemplated in this work?
Thanks for the question. At present, this is not an option that's in the TUP package. That's something that we could add to it, and we could bring that up through the engagement with the advisory planning commissions. Part of the challenge with that type of scenario is that if the end goal is to rezone, doing a TUP on top of rezoning can be a lot of process, so it might be easier for the home-based business, if they are hitting that need to grow, to look at rezoning or potentially relocation if there's a commercial site that's better adapted to it.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I would like the 100 meters to be increased substantially, because I don't really think that's applicable for a rural area.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Buchan? Director Acton.
Well, isn't the cannabis one, it's 300 or 50? I think we reduced
Are
it.
you directing your question to staff?
Oh, I was having a chat with Director Nicholson, but just understanding the logic, because that was just a very quick, oh yeah, let's do that.
Through the chair, I unfortunately don't have an answer prepared for that specific question.
But Ms. Pressman's going to help you.
Through the chair to Director Acton, the information, public notice requirement for cannabis retail is 300 meters. Is that what you're referring to? That's in the policy. But our procedures bylaw for public notice for other application types is a notification area of 100 meters from the subject property. Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Buchan? And this is an information item, so we don't need to send you off with the resolution. We are going to have this to go to our APCs and other agencies. Director Nicholson.
Can I ask one more question? What about things like campgrounds? Where are they allowed and?
Yeah, and through the chair, presently this would be something that could be contemplated on a TUP issued on a site that's already zoned for commercial purposes, but not necessarily a campground use.
But forestry?
Not presently. That's something though that.
So
could
this
change
is a
as it
fairly
comes back.
limited.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It appears there's no more questions, so thank you very much, Mr. Buchan, and we look forward to the results of the consultation that's coming forward, and thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Ms. Boyd, what's our next item?
R2, report from the Development Services Division regarding subdivision application SA 23C04. I got a whole bunch. 3370 Cobble Hill Road, PID 009. 463330 and 009 463313 fronted exemption.
Welcome, Rashenda. It says Jamie's name is on this, but I gather you're stepping in for Ms. Davina.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we're just keeping everyone on their toes. Planner Davina is unfortunately not available right now. So I'm going to be doing this in her absence, and please bear with me. Next slide, please. So the application before you is a frontage request for a boundary adjustment between two parcels in electoral area C. Next parcel, whatever that is. The proposed boundary adjustment would eliminate the landlocked parcel, creating two properties with frontage on Cobble Hill Road and siting an existing dwelling on each lot. The proposed subdivision was approved by the ALC with conditions which are listed in the report. Proposed Lot A of the application has a proposed road frontage of 2.4%, which is under the 10% frontage requirement in Section 512 of the Local Government Act. Proposed Lot B has a large frontage with 32%. Next slide, please. And staff consider the frontage to be sufficient as it would make use of an existing driveway. The terrain is suitable and there is an adequate building envelope. Therefore, staff are recommending option 1, which is exemption from the 10% requirement be granted. And I'll do my best if you have any questions.
Any questions for staff? Turn to the director for the area.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm quite happy to move the recommendation of staff.
Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. Any discussion? Oh, maybe you should read it out.
Thank you, Chair. That it be recommended to the board that the proposed Lot A in subdivision application number SA 23C04 3370 Cobble Hill Road, PID 009463330 and 009463313 be exempted from the minimum parcel frontage requirement in accordance with Section 512 of the Local Government Act.
Call the question, all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. R3, it's Ms. Woods again.
Thank you,
Please
Mr.
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm more familiar with this application. And I'm here today to present DVP 23I03, which is an application to reduce the interior side parcel line setback and the setback from a watercourse. Next slide, please. The subject property is located in Yubo on Miracle Close. The subject property is the last undeveloped property on Miracle Close and is surrounded by residential properties of similar sizes. The subject property was created through a legal subdivision, not illegal, subdivision in 1990, and the owners are proposing a single detached dwelling of approximately 600 square feet. Due to environmental constraints on site, and zoning as a residential parcel, the site is subject to undue hardship under wrapper, which provides opportunity for parcels that don't meet the standards of wrapper. This map here shows on the slide that there are 2 seasonal watercourses currently on the subject property. The applicants have received approval under the Water Sustainability Act to divert the northern channel into the southern channel to create a feasible building site for their detached dwelling, and restoration will be required through that process and secured also through the development permit process, which will follow. Next slide, please. And this site plan is the current site plan, and it shows the realignment of the northern channel into the southern channel. A small portion of the deck, you'll note, is encroaching into the SPIA. It should also be noted that when staff sent out notifications to property owners, there was a request with a slightly different shape of the house. The request was to reduce the interior side parcel line from 3 meters to 1 meter, and the setback from a watercourse from 15 to 8.21 meters. The applicant has since had a new house design, and that allows for a 2.4 meter setback from the interior side parcel line, so requesting a 0.6 meter setback reduction, and a reduction of 15 meters to, 8.65, I left half my notes at my desk, meters for the setback to a watercourse. And next slide. Based on the information that's outlined in the staff report and before you today, staff do consider this to be an appropriate balance between zoning requirements and the environmental considerations on site, while still allowing the use as a residential property to be realized. Therefore, we recommend option 1, which is before you, and I will stop talking.
Thank you. So just with our, to remind everyone of our process, we will go to directors for questions to staff. Upon completion of that, we'll ask if the applicant, and I think I have the applicant's name here somewhere. Is it Brett Lecomte? Close enough, I guess. And we will go to questions for the applicant. And following that, make sure that all the questions the directors have been satisfied, then we will consider a resolution, and at that point there'll be no other inputs from the applicant. So with that, I'm going to turn to directors and ask if there's questions for staff. Director Deck.
Now, I know that area minimally, but I do know that there are fish-bearing creeks, particularly Miracle Creek. And I'm wondering if the hydrology has been done, or whatever studies need to be done to determine if there's any risk to the fish population or spawning or?
Through the chair, so there has been a preliminary riparian wrapper assessment done by a qualified environmental professional who does address those things. It has been reviewed by wrapper staff, the provincial wrapper staff. However, they can't actually approve any application, any wrapper application, until the local government has issued any variances that we will be issuing, just because of the undue hardship scenario. So it's a slightly different path that is designed through wrapper legislation to allow for development on sites that would today not meet to the riparian area regulation standards, but were developed at a time where something like wrapper or RAR, which is the predecessor, didn't exist. So that study has been done on a site level basis through the riparian areas assessment report.
So it's been done and they don't, is that what you're telling me, that it's been done?
Through the chair, yes. So it has been done through that. It's site-specific for that property, and it is done the same way that any other riparian areas protection regulation assessment report is done. They do assess the if there's a hardship to, like, what is it, had? Right, yeah. So they do assess whether there is a significant harm to fish. That's what it's called, harm to fish. And through that, it's then whether it's approved by the riparian provincial staff will, if it meets their standards, then they've determined through that it is they've done the most that they possibly can, especially in an undue hardship situation, to eliminate and mitigate any harm to the fish.
Do you have a follow-up?
I probably will. I do have another question, though. It's about, I'll pass for now and find my question.
I'll put you on round two. Director Martman.
Thank you for the report, and along the same way, I think this is the first time I've run across this type of application, and I'm just trying to wrap my head. So what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the province says to local government, approve this basically, and then we'll look at it and then decide if we're going to approve it. Is that?
So through the chair, do you want to go?
Come on, Ms. Pressman.
Oh, yeah, we do have our environmental planner in the back corner there, if you'd like him to explain. But the process, yes, does go that a preliminary riparian assessment report is done. And through the legislation, it states that local government has to decide on whether there will be a variance granted, and then it will go back to the province. But I'll let Nick.
Welcome.
Hi, through the chair. There's a couple different things going on here. So one is that a Water Sustainability Act approval has been granted to take both of those channels and put them into one. So through the WSA application, they also look at the in-stream habitat to ensure that it is not only for fish, but all the other species. So that is the WSA application. So as the works are going to put these two channels together, that the habitat will go back, and that's part of the restoration. Now, in terms of the setbacks and land clearing in the upland portion, so once these two go together, we have a setback now that's changed because we had two channels, now we're having one. The riparian protection regulation under section 11 says that if you're in a hardship, which this site is, that the approval is conditional, subject to variances to reduce legally restricted areas of the site. So that's why we have the front or the side yard setbacks to be reduced, because if those get reduced, then that pushes development further away from the streams, but there's still an encroachment. So right now the wrapper has been reviewed, and the last condition is to determine whether the setbacks will be reduced, which is a board decision, and if that is done, then the wrapper will be, resubmitted with the, making sure everything is succinct to that specific section of the regulation, and then will be issued for approval. So right now, it's about a conditional approval in principle, but if this is denied, then those setbacks, as they are today, would change this layout and the scope of encroachment within the SPIA. But I think in terms of, again, your question about fish habitat, that is mostly going to be addressed in stream by the Water Sustainability Act application, that is putting these two channels into one. But then restoration is happening both within the stream channel and in the riparian areas that will not be impacted by the proposed development.
So there must be a concern somewhere. Oh, may I? May I? Sure.
Have other speakers on the list. Does that conclude your, go ahead, follow up?
Thank you, and I'm sure Director Deck will probably have more follow-up for that. So my next question then is about the placement of the septic field and the proposed house. And that, I think, is the reason, I'm understanding, is the reason why the setbacks need to be encroached is sort of how the footprint and how they're placed. And so what kind of work has been done to say, is this optimizing what property within the setbacks that could be used, or is this like just no other options is my question.
Yeah, through the chair. They have done all of those calculations about putting it in some other part of the property. At one point, there was exploring if it could be on the south side of the property, but the qualified environmental professional did state that the south side of the property isn't suitable. It's a large cliff bank, and it's treed with some of the last remaining mature trees on the property. So they have assessed the other parts of the parcel for development, and this was found by the qualified environmental professional to be the best path forward.
Director Acton.
I guess I struggle with when we use the word hardship and then we have people come forward for variances. And it would be good, it would be great if we had some kind of policy or something, because I'm looking at this report, it's near a park, doesn't sound like it's very buildable. To me, it just seems like it's just not a buildable lot. And like we should be buying lots that suit what we want to build and if they're buildable. So there's just this part of me that thinks like, what exactly is the hardship? I guess there's no way to build anything by the sounds of it, and then environmentally. And we're gonna, I don't know. It seems like, anyway, maybe.
So we heard a question in that, and I think you've got some comment for when we have a resolution on the floor. So we've got 3 staff up there. Maybe we can hear from all of you. Ms. Woods,
Well, I'll do
Ms.
one word at a time,
yeah.
okay? Through the chair. So undue hardship is, in this particular case, is a defined term under the Riparian Areas Protection Act. And this was a property that was created through a legal subdivision in 1990. Today, yes, I agree, this property wouldn't be created because it is a not buildable lot that falls within riparian standards. However, in 1990, those legislations didn't exist. So because it is a legally created lot and it is zoned for residential use, this is the path forward through the wrapper defined undue hardship process. Okay, Michelle's good. Nick, do you have anything else?
I'll just quickly add, so today, under section 10.4 of the wrapper, you can't create lots and then undue hardship, so this is not possible under the current regulation. Of course, that's incumbent of having very good stream mapping and assessments to identify all of these streams in a subdivision application to know where they are, to know where those protection areas are, so that lot can be developed outside of the setbacks. So you can't create a lot like this anymore today under the wrapper.
Okay, and I've got Director Abbott and McClinton, and I'm just going to remind everyone we're in questions for staff, and we will want to hear from the applicant before we go into resolution and comments. So I'll go to Director Abbott first.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered if staff might provide validity to the public information we heard earlier that at one point, perhaps prior to 1990, this was parkland.
Through the
Ms.
chair.
Woods?
Through the chair, I don't have any knowledge of that. Looking back in subdivision plans, there was never any denotation on a subdivision plan of it being parkland. However, I don't know what conversations were had by park staff at that point. That's all I got for you. Sorry.
Director McClinton, Nicholson, myself, and then we'll go to Director Deck. Director McClinton.
I've looked through, yeah, thank you, Chair, through the staff. I'm just looking at this tiny map here. I counted roughly 35 properties. So I guess two questions. One, I mean, where there's all these segments here, are there houses on all of those parcels? And then two, does that stream run across 2 roads and across 7 properties in this tiny little map that I see here?
Through the chair, you are testing me with 2 questions at once. The answer to the first one, whether there was houses.
On the cover page of your first location map, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's about 35 lots there. Do all of those have houses on them? And this is
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second question is, if I may, Chair, the stream, it's hard to tell with the two. Does it flow through, like, I see roughly would be 7 properties and 2 roads it crosses?
So, through the chair, I don't have the entire stream mapped on this, but yes, it does flow through other properties. I actually believe this one might flow from the park land behind it into this lot. It would go under the road as well, yeah.
One more follow-up, if I may. Is that big parcel there on this, is that the parkland? The biggest lot? Which one's the, can you point out which one's the parkland?
I can do my best. Through the chair, it's the one on the, oh God, I can't see what I'm doing.
Kind of to the upper left?
Yes. That's
you.
a better way to describe it.
And just a comment in that this was created in 1990 prior to riparian regulation, like it was a different universe. And so there will be houses that are probably situated in locations that wouldn't be allowed today. So we've got that unenviable task of looking at a lot and a building site that wouldn't even be possible to be created today. So with that, I will go to Director Nicholson, then myself, then Director Deck for round 2. Director Nicholson.
Thank you, that was my question.
Yes, okay. So I'm rather bothered by this, and I'll try and keep this to a question. I can't recall the last time I've seen a stream diversion in a variance application. This is somewhat dramatic, and I guess my question would be, I'm just looking at this, and I'm not a planner, I'm not a environmental specialist, but my preference would be like a 0 side yard setback as opposed to any incursion into the SPIA. I would prefer to see the building site fully outside the SPIA and the septic receiving area, further to the west in this map. So I guess my question is has every permutation and possibility been explored from staff's perspective to eliminate or even greater mitigate the impacts to the environment, given the limitations? Has there been other options that have been presented to staff, or has this been what's been solely applied for with no other exploration?
Through the chair, to the chair. So there was a long process, I believe, and the applicant, Brett, may be able to speak more to it, prior to any application being made about finding the suitable building site. It has been, I mean, in terms of the stream diversion portion of your question, the CVRD unfortunately doesn't have a lot of say around that. That is, it was a change approval issued by the Water Sustainability, under the Water Sustainability Act by ministry staff. I would expect that ministry staff had done due diligence and explored the other possibilities. That's sort of our expectation as CVRD staff. And then based on other site constraints, having one side be, the south side of the property be very sloped, that sort of eliminated that side. There, even if they did go down to the south side, there still would be a SPIA encroachment for driveways to actually access the site. And the applicant has come back in the last few weeks with a house that is narrower and falls more outside of the SPIA than what they had originally proposed. So it did allow a little bit of reduction. They've also been, and in speaking with our chief building official, they've also been dealing with the spatial separation issue between two parcels, which I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but we're a regional district, so apparently it's more than if we were a municipality. The spatial separation needs to be a little bit more. So we have sort of addressed all of we've assessed all of these different components. This is very similar to what was proposed to us in 2023 when the application was made. I would imagine there's probably a lot of backstory before that too, though. And then the applicant has made a few concessions with house design as well, so.
Okay, thank you. I'll now go to Director Deck, and I think we want to hear from the applicant as well. So Director Deck, question for Ms. Woods.
Yes, thank you. In the attachment B, which is the government one, I'm wondering if that's boilerplate or if that's specific to this property.
Through the chair, the Water Sustainability Act, the change order issuance, is that?
Let me go up to the top. There's 9 pages, right?
It's the draft development permit is attachment
Okay.
B, and then there is, I believe, the water sustainability change order, or change approval within that document. And so they are specific to each parcel. They do consider the differences of each parcel.
Okay.
Our colleague Nick in the back might have more if you would like further explanation of how they come to those.
So I'm just thinking about number 14, which says measures must be taken to ensure that no damage or, thank you, my page disappeared. Thank you. 17. 14, 17? No, sorry, 14. I'm sorry, guys. Measures must be taken to assure that no harmful material, and there's things in quotes, which could adversely impact water quality, fish, and other aquatic life or fish habitat be allowed to enter the wetted perimeter. So there must be some concern then. And does that qualifier ensure that no fish will come in, or, like, I'm just wondering how you prevent, after having infilled a creek and sort of done riparian, there's riparian damage, I wonder how you can ensure that the fish will have not already been disturbed or will be disturbed. It just, the concern is clearly there, so.
So through the chair, I don't have the attachment in front of me, so I can't read it unfortunately, but it sounds like that might be in relation to sediment and erosion control, which is a standard requirement of all works that take place within riparian areas, whether they're within a SPIA or outside of the SPIA. So that is standard. And
Just add on to it. So also, if you continue to look through the conditions, one of the other requirements is requiring environmental monitoring by a qualified environmental professional during any of the work. So that would be one of their tasks, is to ensure that that's in place.
So with that, I see, did you, for staff?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. And it's, I was thinking on similar lines. If this application passes, like $5,000 is for a deposit is kind of not motivating enough.
through the chair, it's based on a cost estimate of the landscaping estimate. I don't have the landscape estimate in front of me. However, it's $5,000 or 125% of whatever that landscape cost estimate prepared by the qualified environmental professional is. That's based out of our procedures bylaw.
There's no way for us to require more, because I see it all the time on the lake, and it's just not even done. No, people don't even try and get it back.
Yeah, through the chair, I don't know of another avenue to collect more. I don't know if Ms. President or Ms. Charoff know of another one. I mean, the reality is there's all like it takes a lot of money sometimes for somebody.
Here's a question then: is it tied to getting occupancy of the house, or like does it have to be fulfilled before the project is completed in that way? At least building can make sure it gets done if there's any harm or repair to be done.
Through the chair, we could explore making a condition on the development permit, which would be delegated to the general manager, around prior to issuance of development permit, the landscape or building permit, the landscape bond or the landscaping shall be in. We do have or in place. I mean, we have a 2-year waiting period as well, where so basically after they put the landscaping in place, they can apply for 50% of their bond back. And then they have to wait 2 years to ensure that the vegetation has survived. And we get a letter from somebody qualified to assess that, whether it be the QEP or a landscape architect. And after 2 years, they'd send us that letter to say, yes, everything's in place, or no, not everything's in place, at which point we wouldn't release the other 50%, and they would potentially be required to do more, replace what had been died off.
And if I'm not mistaken, that's a legislative requirement, the amount, the 125%, and we can't really vary from that. Is that not correct? I think this has been discussed many times before, so. Would be I think staff need to hang around because there might be some follow-up questions after we hear from the applicants. So, Brett, would you like to come forward and tell us what's going on?
There you go.
Hi, everybody. I can actually help with your question right away. The replanting is $1,900 is what our COVIDI, who's our geo and our biologist, has required, and that's where that number came from. So it's quite a bit more. And when we're building, part of what we're doing is we started off with building a house, but then I realized that I didn't want the garbage. So what we've done now is we're gonna build a footing and have a modular home come in and drop on top of the footing, so there'll be no construction, right? Because that was kind of an issue for me. I didn't wanna, I know construction guys, they throw their sandwiches somewhere and then you get raccoons showing up or bears and everything starts just going chaotic. And so that's kind of why I chose a skinnier building, and that whole piece across the top, because it is the very furthest away I can get from what they're calling a stream is actually a ditch of mud. That's all it is. It's a wet mud line. So, I mean, it kind of, the wording sort of doesn't do it justice for what it really is. There's no movement of water that you can see, even in the wintertime. There's no fish that have ever gone through there or can even get there. It's just the water there is at the apex, so it feeds both sides. So you have water going into the Miracle Creek Side Park, and then you have it going into the Sword Fern. So at that time, there really isn't a lot of water to have gained from tributaries to make it a substantial amount of water. I don't know if that helps.
Do you have any sort of presentation you want to make, or
No,
are you
it's
just
all
here for
pretty
questions?
much, it's all pretty much in there.
Okay, good. I'll go to directors. Director Abbott, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Is this a vacation property, or is this your
No, it's going to
home?
be my wife's retirement. That's why it's so small. We don't have kids. We don't need anything gigantic. So that's why we've gone, again, when we first put the application in, the house size was 38 by 28. And they were leaning towards giving it to us. And then I started thinking about the construction aspect, my neighbors and the trucks up and down the street and, just that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to bring that on my neighbors. So this is why we've come up with this sort of simple, crane puts the house on, away we go.
Follow up?
The septic field needs to be as big as it's portrayed on the drawings?
It's actually because of our new house, I'm hoping that we can shrink it and actually make it skinnier, is the idea. Our original septic field was based on that house I was talking to you about. This house here, we have no dishwasher in it, so that'll help shrink we're looking at everything to make it smaller. That's kind of the idea with what we're trying to do. It will be a sand mound system, so that's very, good. It's good for the environment. It's a lot better than what they were doing many years ago, so. That's pretty much the size of it. The discharge isn't that much because there's just two people. Everything is energy efficient. Water restrictors on everything in our house and stuff. So it's really not a lot going in there. That's kind of the idea. Hope I answered your question.
Anyone else? Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious, if you don't mind sharing, how long have you owned the property for, and how long has this application been underway?
We started, it's been about 3 years, the whole project. The province did originally approved everything after 18 months, and then Rapper came in, and that's what slowed the process down because they wanted us to do more.
And follow up, yeah. And so did you start the application as soon as you bought the property?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. So I partly wanted to know my guidelines, right? So I didn't want to damage stuff. So I wanted to know where I could work with.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Well, I have one. So I'm just looking at this, and I heard from staff your attempts to mitigate incursion into the SPIA, and I'm challenged with diverting and consolidating the two streams or ditches. But just looking at the layout here, has there been consideration of the house location where your septic area is and moving the septic area? Now, I'm assuming this is oriented north, but more to the location where the house is. I'm really reluctant to support a fairly dramatic environmental change, and so have you looked at swapping the location of the house versus the septic, and have you looked at all options? And we can't tell from topography here as to
Right.
whether or not you could put the house closer to the road, but give us your thoughts on
The
how you
reason-
got here.
Sorry, the reason that area's been taken is that's natural. That's the only natural actual ground on the property. The rest of it is all old railway, right? So you can't put a septic field on something that just makes it transfer. So this has been perk tested. We've done all the stuff necessary to see how much water flows through, and none of it basically just, but again, by putting a sand mound system in, it stops any real leaching from going too far. That's the whole idea to it. But the reason it's there is because it's the only organic earth that's left on the property. Everything else is either some kind of fill from the railway, logs that have been buried, stuff like that, so.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're going to just see if there's any further questions to staff before, and I have a suggestion that we take a short break. Is there any other questions for staff before we entertain a resolution? Seeing none, was that a request for a break right now before we go to the resolution? Okay, then everybody back here in 7 minutes at 3:45. Welcome back, everyone. Before us, we have item R3, and I will turn, if there's any further questions for staff, Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm kind of surprised at some of the things. Well, first question is to staff regarding the stream ditch, whatever it is. Has staff been out there and had a look at it? What's your impression of, first of all, what it actually is?
Through the chair, staff were out there. I was not on site, but there were enforcement staff out there. From what I've heard from them, they thought it was I don't know. They're not qualified to say exactly what it is, but their comments indicated they could understand how there was confusion.
Okay, and follow up, please. As I understand it then, if one of the comments I heard just now was that this whole discussion here is a preliminary step towards pushing this forward to the next level of bureaucracy for final approval or more investigations, is that correct?
Through the chair, this is a step, correct. So it has been sent to riparian staff to review already. It has been assessed by a qualified environmental professional, actually 2, I believe, on this particular site. And it's now under the wrapper legislation to be sent to us to decide whether we will issue a variance. Obviously, issuing the reduction to the interior side parcel line does allow for the development to be pushed slightly further away from the SPIA. I don't think I mentioned it originally, but the SPIA is 10 meters. Our setback from watercourse is 15 meters. So there's a slight difference there. But yeah, it's with the local government now. And then once you make the decision, then it will be sent back to riparian provincial staff with that decision.
Good, so there's and final follow-up, please, Mr. Chair, if I could. There is no final decision being made here. It's purely another step in the process to say to another higher level, here it is, we think it's okay, what do you think? And then it would come back to us again?
Through the chair, no, it doesn't come back to you again. But yes, this is not, it's not like they would get issuance of this variance and then go straight to building permit. Okay. They still would need to go back to riparian provincial staff. It would then come back to us again with a development permit delegated to the general manager.
Good, thank you very much.
Director Acton.
Thank you. I'm gonna be in favor of this application. I think everybody, if we do have one?
This is questions for staff.
Aren't we done? The questions? Okay.
Do you have a question for staff? Okay, so let's go to the director for the area.
So today, we have to decide based on the report that's in front of us, and seeing that all steps so far have been followed and the staff report advocates for approval, I think we should do that as a step in the process. And whatever comes next, we'll deal with that too. Thank you.
Are you moving the
Yes, I
recommended
am.
resolution?
Yes, I am.
And moved and seconded. Ms. Boyd, will you please read the resolution?
Thank you, Chair. That it be recommended to the board that the development variance permit number DVP 23I03 Lot 32 Miracle Close, PID 016771702 to reduce the interior side parcel line setback and the setback to a water course for construction of a single detached dwelling and septic field be issued.
Any desire for discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Are there any opposed? 2 opposed. The motion carries. That goes to the Wednesday, September 11th, 2024 board meeting. Ms. Boyd, R4.
Thank you, Chair. Report from the Senior Manager, Inspections and Enforcement Division regarding exemption to noise control bylaw number 3723.
Mr. McDonald.
I have no presentation.
No presentation.
There's a short report in front of you with a recommendation that kind of sums up the whole report. I could elaborate more if you like, or you can just have me here for questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Director Martman.
Good, I was just making sure this is about a Thetis Island.
Yes, it is. Just Thetis Island.
So,
unfortunately, the representative from BC Ferries couldn't be here today, so
Yeah.
I'll do my best to answer the question. This, I will give a little bit of context to this one, so just so everybody knows. BC Ferries did a study of their 3 terminals, Deschemanis, Penelkut, and Thetis Island. So they're looking to do works at all 3. They brought a report forward to North Cowichan back in July 9th. So it's in essence the same works they're going to perform here, and they had to get the same. It's not an exemption to the bylaw. It's really just looking at that we wouldn't enforce. There'll be a little bit of works done after hours. So the noise bylaw does look at noise levels after 7 o'clock at night, or at 9 o'clock. Sorry, 9 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning. So there'll be some works between mid-October and the beginning of November. So that's what they're looking for, is just that they could perform those works, and a lot of it's safety works. And if they were to perform these works during regular hours and shut the dock down, then there's safety implications, use of the people getting on and off the island. So anyway, that's why staff was very supportive of this.
Director Martman.
So one of the things they mentioned in this about using a vibratory hammer, and I think the question I have is that going to be 24/7, or even like all night for over and over for a couple of weeks? And I guess the question would be, do they ever give a break and just say, you know what, Sunday we're just going to give it, like, take a moment and let people breathe from those kinds of
It is
things.
unfortunate that they couldn't be here. I did, and I only just discovered this yesterday when I was able to finally get access to the report that was given to North Cowichan, and I did see a question and answer thing that they had kind of done between themselves. And I'm just looking to see if they did. I noticed that they did have some information about, they did their best to suppress the noise. They've taken all kinds of mitigation things that they've got planned. And in what I've read, I don't see that there's going to be a real impact on the public.
Director McClinton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have a open house or public engagement in 2 weeks on Thetis, so this might be of interest. I just heard you, I just want to confirm, you said they will be shutting down operations after 9?
Oh, whatever their normal time, they would shut it down to do these works, because it's all safety works. I don't have those kind of details. I don't know what they're going to shut down, but I think to keep it operational as best they can, they're going to do some of these works at night.
Sorry, I'll clarify my question. From 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., they will be working or will not be working?
Our bylaw, they're requesting that some of the works may be in that time, and that's why they want that we wouldn't enforce our bylaw, because some of the works, and what I've read from them, that's what's going to happen in that period. I don't know the extent. I know there's going to be some chainsaws. It's about possibly one piling that's going to be the one that Director Martman's talked about, but I've also, in the report I read from North Cowichan, it looked like most of it was like doing some chainsawing, so maybe cutting some things out and works like that.
One quick follow-up. And you mentioned the work will be completed in November.
To the best of my knowledge, they've said in their report, which is attachment, that it will be done by, looks like 2 weeks. So they said mid-October, so I guess there's a little window when it will start. And depending, we all know when we do renovations, that you may come across something that takes a little bit longer.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Director Deck, can you turn off your microphone? And who would like to move the resolution? Moved by Director McClinton, seconded by Director Wilson. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Ms. Boyd, next item.
Thank you, Chair. R5, report from the Utilities Division regarding inclusions into the Cobble Hill Village Sewer Services area.
It doesn't look like we're having a staff presentation. Do you want to give us a quick rundown of what this is, Ms. Thompson?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't have a presentation, but I'm available for questions. This is to include several properties in the Cobble Hill Village area that would like to join the Cobble Hill Village sewer system as a result of the project of a sewer main extension that makes the sewer available now to these properties.
Excellent. Director Wilson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm quite happy to move this motion forward, and just to say that it's not often that I say I'm very proud of a sewer system, but in this particular case I am. It's one of the best that we've got in the whole areas. Thank you very much.
And it's been duly seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. R6.
Thank you, Chair. Report from the Utilities Division regarding inclusions into Mill Springs Sewer System Service Area.
I see it was, are you moving it or are you speaking to it?
Both.
Moved by Director Segal, seconded by Director McClinton. Director Segal.
I just want to say that the sewer system in Mill Bay is the best in all my areas.
I didn't have Ms. Boyd read out the last one, so I think I'll give her a break and not make her read out this one. So with that, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Ms. Boyd, next.
Thank you, Chair. We have no unfinished business, no new business. We move to question period, not seeing anyone left in the gallery. May I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Moved, seconded, all in favor?